And now, as the dust of Ferdinand's reign settles into history books and whispered legends, you're left with something murkier than mere fact. The legacy. Not the legacy of a builder or a hero, but the fragmented echoes of a man who tried to mold a kingdom around his fears. You sit with it for a moment. How everything in his world circled back to control, to needing it, to fearing its loss, to punishing anyone who reminded him he didn't have it. Take, for instance, his treatment of the press. The moment he regained power in 1814, Ferdinand abolished the Constitution of Cadiz, dissolved Parliament, and crushed every liberal voice he could find. Newspapers were censored or shut down. Writers arrested, tortured, exiled. And why? Because their words threatened the illusion of his perfection, his masculine authority, his divine image. But behind the curtains he was desperately fragile, haunted by whispers, consumed with his appearance. There's even an old court account describing how Ferdinand ordered his own portraits touched up to hide the puffiness of his face, a minor vanity. Until you realize that every flaw on the canvas felt like a threat to his rule. He wanted to be seen as a king. But not just any king. A manly king, a fertile king, a king who fathered nations. And that's where the legacy gets complicated. Because in the end, Ferdinand did produce an heir, Isabella II, born to his fourth wife, Maria Cristina. But even that came wrapped in national drama. Her succession sparked civil war, divided the country, and fed into generations of instability. You begin to see how his entire legacy hinges on failure. Failed marriages, failed reforms, failed peace. Even the restoration of Bourbon rule, which came years later, arrived not because of Ferdinand's brilliance, but because Spain had run out of better options. Historians still argue whether he was a tyrant or a puppet, an isolated madman or a cunning manipulator. Was he sincerely ill, both mentally and physically? Or was he playing on fear, weaponizing pity, and using illness as an excuse to crush dissent? There's no clear answer. But the record shows a chilling consistency. Anytime his personal insecurities were exposed, others paid the price. He had liberals hanged for suggesting he limit his power. He ordered mass purges of civil servants simply for sympathizing with the French Constitution. He kept secret files on those who laughed too loudly at court. Yes, laughed. And throughout it all, the most devastating irony. He believed he was saving Spain, that his brutality was righteous, that his purges were protection, that his silence about his body and mind was somehow noble. But what he was really doing was leaving landmines. Every time he rewrote a law to secure his throne, he made Spain weaker. Every time he silenced a rival, he made the opposition more radical. Every time he pretended to be whole, he deepened the fracture beneath. And as you trace the decades after his death, the wars, the revolutions, the exile of Isabella, the rise of republicanism, you can feel the country limping forward with a wound it never asked for. A wound that came from the top down, a wound named Ferdinand. By the early 20th century, few want to speak of him. He becomes an embarrassment, a footnote, a cautionary line in dusty lectures. But his decisions echo still, buried in Spanish lore and legend. His is not a legacy of grandeur, it's a legacy of damage, of personal dysfunction scaled up to national disaster. You remember what they whispered at court? That his body was grotesquely mismatched. That doctors struggled to describe what they saw without blushing. That his shame, his obsessions, his cruelty, all began not with ambition, but with the shape of the man beneath the crown. It makes you wonder how many kings ruled not because they were worthy, but because no one dared to say otherwise. And how many nations still suffer because someone like Ferdinand VII got to rewrite the rules in his own twisted image. His reign has ended. His family's golden age is long gone. But his story still speaks, quietly, queasily, from the shadows of power. And now, in the hush before sleep, you reach the end. Not of a reign or a chapter in history, but of a deeply human unraveling. The last days of Ferdinand VII are not dramatic. There are no final speeches carved into marble, no battlefield deaths or glorious exits. There is only rot. By the 1830s, his body has begun to betray him in ways even his enemies could not. You imagine him slouched in his chair, swollen with gout, mouth twisted from strokes, skin pale and clammy as illness slowly chips away at the remnants of the man who once ordered mass executions with a flick of his wrist. You can almost hear the labored breath, the shuffled steps, the curtains always drawn too tightly to block out what he feared most, public scorn. Public. Because by now, his paranoia is no longer political. It is personal. He believes his own daughter, Isabella, is being plotted against by enemies real and imagined. He suspects Maria Cristina, his fourth wife, of disloyalty. He swaps advisors like socks. The court tiptoes around him, unsure whether he will lash out, break down, or forget the conversation entirely. Historians still debate whether he had developed a form of vascular dementia, or if his mind was merely unraveling from years of repression, paranoia, and fear. Either way, by the summer of 1833, the end is near. But Ferdinand, even in decay, cannot die quietly. No, he must leave a mess. In a last desperate move, he invokes the pragmatic sanction, a dusty law buried in Bourbon archives that allows his daughter, rather than a male relative, to inherit the throne. This shatters centuries of precedent and ignites the Carlist Wars, named for his conservative brother Carlos, who believes the throne should rightfully pass to him. So once again, Ferdinand's legacy spirals outward into conflict. You see how it fits. Even his death must fracture the kingdom. He passes away on September 29, 1833. No grand procession, no united nation in mourning, just a splintered court and a trembling child queen thrust into the chaos he left behind. But here's the cruel twist of it all. Despite everything, despite the fear, the cruelty, the censorship and brutality, Ferdinand VII never got what he wanted most, to be remembered with reverence. He longed to be a new Charles III, a second Philip V. Instead, history tucks him into the drawer of rulers best forgotten. And yet he lingers, not as a monument, not as a legend, but as a warning. His body, deformed, secret, whispered about, was never just a personal issue. It became the black hole around which his entire kingdom was pulled. His shame became public crisis. His obsession with potency became policy. His instability became law. You wonder how many others are like him. How many leaders quietly project their traumas outward until entire nations bend under the weight of one man's mind. Ferdinand's life was not a tragedy because he was born flawed. It was a tragedy because he refused to heal. He refused to be vulnerable, to speak openly, to let others in. And in trying to smother that shame, he smothered a kingdom's future with it. You picture him now. Not in his prime, not on a throne, but alone. In his last hours. Surrounded not by glory, but by people too afraid to speak. The legacy of a man so terrified of being mocked that he destroyed everything to make sure no one laughed. And still the whispers never stopped. Not then, not now. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and the sound of history fades to a hush, let's breathe slower for a moment. Let Ferdinand drift into the distance, his chaotic court and shadowed fears dissolving like mist. You're safe now, tucked beneath your sheets, the world outside quiet and still. No court to navigate, no plots to unravel, just the soft hum of the night and the rise and fall of your breath. The story we've told tonight may be full of dark corners, but it carries something more than just scandal. It's a reminder of how fragile even the most powerful people can be, how the cracks in one person can become the fault lines of an entire era, and how sometimes history isn't about the grand battles or the royal decrees, but about the quiet, broken things that no one was supposed to see. The candlelight has dimmed. The palace walls have crumbled. The voices of fear and fury have faded into the long silence of time. Let them rest there. Let your thoughts soften. Your body sink deeper into warmth and your breath grow slow and easy. Because tonight, you've traveled through the strange chambers of a troubled life, and you've made it through. There's nothing left to fix, nothing more to fear. Just stillness, just sleep, just peace.